I know we had some questions that came up, but specifically there were some points that we need to address related to this evening, but are there anything outside of those 4 points that we need to address, policy questions that came up based on your feedback from the general public comment on this issue?
I think I kind of asked this question before, but I guess I'll ask it again, and I assume the answer will be the same. But when we talk about building these CIPs, either the revenue models or the general obligation bonds and the general fund, how do we ensure that what we're paying for is sustainable and within our budget? And that's why we use a 5-year plan, but go ahead.
Correct. Good evening. Rochelle Matthews, Director of Finance. So let's use the debt service fund as a specific example. When we run our forecast, not only does our budget team provide us revenue projections, when we look at the CIP projects, we also anticipate those projects being bonded and the principal and interest that would be added in each subsequent year after those debt. And we compare those two to make sure we have not only a balanced budget, but a sustainable fund that meets our needs and our policy requirements.
And that's how the rate models work with the utility funds as well.
Correct.
So, for example, we've, several years ago, we talked about, and every year we've talked about a rate model that anticipated projects 3 years in the future, and that we're going to pay for them for 20 years thereafter.
Correct.
They've been in the plan for the whole time.
Yes.
That's how they're sustainable.
Correct. And a similar process happens on the debt service fund with those projects.
And for example, our capital improvement plan, total revenue, I'm looking on page 36, from our general fund, our stormwater fee, our solid waste fee, we're spending, as mentioned, $83 million this year, but next year it's $34 million, then it's $12 million in general obligation bonds, then it's $8 million, there's $8 million, right? We've, for the last couple of years, front-loaded that, and now know to sustain that, we can't do that continuously going forward.
Correct. As Mary pointed out in her presentation, due to our forecast and the revenues, we need to slow down or unfund or change timing of projects to maintain the affordability of our funds.
And we'd love to keep Station 7, for example, in there, but we don't think that's sustainable to leave that amount of money in those, even though it's off years 29 and 30.
Correct.
And so that's how we work to keep this sustainable.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Mayor.
Please.
Rachel, sorry about that. Could you talk a little bit about, somebody could talk a little bit about how much debt can we take on before, because if I remember right from talking about bonding and so forth, we have to maintain certain levels of monies out there. So could you talk about what is our maximum debt we could potentially have and still meet all of our obligations?
Sure. So there's two different factors here. The first one, this will be a preview that will be here in a few weeks with our annual financial statements, is there's a statutory limit at the state level, and it's 30% of our total assessed valuation in debt, less a couple of exemptions for refundings and other special assessment projects. That's a pretty big number. More practically, there's also a limit with the market. We competitively sell our debt, meaning we go out and we make a public offering and give people the opportunity to give us the best deal possible. So we are publicly rated by Moody's, and they also do an independent financial assessment of our debt capacity, debt load, and revenue, and therefore do their own analysis to whether they agree to buy our bonds or not. And so there's two different factors there.
Okay. Can you tell us where we're at as far as being close to that 30% of total assessed value?
I would have to quote, I don't have 24 numbers, but I think we're roughly somewhere between 24 and 28% of our total allowed statutory state capacity.
Okay. Thank
We
you.
are nowhere near our debt limit.
You used two different numbers there, I want to be clear. 30% of, we're at 24% of 30%.
Correct.
State statute.
Yes,
Yeah.
of our capacity.
Not 24, not close to the 30% at all.
No.
We are at a quarter of what the state would allow us statutorily to take out in debt. More practically, we manage to what can our fund withstand and be sustainable with the resources we're projected to have.
Yeah.
About a 5-year forecast.
So we're at about 7.5 of that 30%. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, I just had
Yeah,
a quick
please,
question.
more.
Rochelle, and that information you provided that debt we're obligated to hold, isn't that usually part of our budget book? Don't we have that information usually on there?
I don't know if it's in our budget book, but it's for sure in our annual comprehensive financial statement and also our popular annual financial statement.
Okay.
So we do publish that on an annual basis.
In that vein, can you speak to the opacity of our non-geo expenses and budget items for the general public to peruse? All those line items, all the information?
Sure.
Can you speak to that idea?
Yeah, so I was here not so many weeks ago with Sound Fiscal Stewardship. We do operate several financial transparency portals. We have one that's a revenue portal where you can compare actual revenues to what the budgets are. And currently, that portal has 23, 24, and year-to-date 25. We also have an expenditure portal where you can look at the expenditure side of the budget equation to compare to actuals, and as well as our very robust CIP and operating budget portal where we have all the updated materials as we create them. The first two things are live links. So as the city cuts payables every week, you guys approve Summit Commission tonight. When those get posted, those go up into the portal and are up to date for the public to view.
And so that then brings to, how does one get to that information? So you can't just knock on the door and we can't hand you, like we used to, the whole budget and say here, because it's probably there now. But, everyone used to get a paper copy of the budget and carry it around, and we'd figure it out. So today, could somebody go get a copy of the paper budget if they want, or I should say an electronic copy of an equivalent of the whole budget if they ask for it?
Yes. We make copies of the budget available on the website
Yeah.
that Mary linked to in her presentation. We also have copies of our annual financial report. And on our finance homepage, you can get to, there's one master link that will take you to all our transparency portals.
Yeah, so there were some questions about how it was difficult to figure out some things about our bonding capabilities, where we're at, where we stand. I'm feeling like you're giving us all this information, and I know that information's out there, but is it hard to get to? Is it something that is difficult for someone to navigate to via just their normal procedures, or are we making it difficult for people to get? I want to make sure that we speak to that.
Yeah, I would welcome if anybody has any comments or questions. We have several email boxes that we're always welcome to answer questions or have assistance with anybody navigating the portal. As Mary indicated earlier, this year, one of the new implementations we have is the CIP guide that talks about what it is, how to read it, how to use it, kind of explains some of the buckets and the terminology and some of those terms and conditions that we're used to using for the general public. Similarly, on the accounting side, we have the popular annual financial report. That's written more at the common denominator. It doesn't have any complex tables, long mathematical equations. It's written to really tell the narrative about the city and our financial condition.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, one commenter mentioned that we were unable to provide information relative to some of our financial health, yet that person was able to accomplish that information in no time at all. I don't even want to speak to the specifics, but is that really possible that we weren't able to answer questions for people that we had to seek some outside attention? Are we not giving people what they need so they can cooperate with us and communicate?
I'm afraid I'm not really specific with that. It would be hard for me to opine to that.
Well, I heard that, and it made me wonder, why we'd have to get somebody to try to summarize what should be fairly clear to somebody who's comfortable with reading this information.
Sure.
And most people are not, just so I want to make sure clear, I think. But many people are not experts in this, and I know it's hard to understand. So I want to make sure I understood what was missing, because I felt like we got a lot of, lack of transparency, and I want to make sure that if there is a lack of transparency, we talk about it here, and that we kind of make sure that there's not, this thing in the room that nobody wants to talk about. So I feel like you're being very transparent, and that you have been to this point. And if there's any way we can change or be better, I'd love to see that. But so far, I feel like you've provided a lot of great information tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So anybody else have any questions or comments on just kind of the motion, or excuse me, the movement forward?
A couple comments, kind of in general first. I mean, and kind of following up on your questions. I mean, I will say that, you know, I've talked to some of the folks from the coalition, and I appreciate what they're doing. I mean, we have more people talking about it this year before, and I think that's good. You know, our budget book is really set up more based upon revenue funds. And so if you're just looking at the budget book, you're looking at each of the funds, and there isn't a page in our budget book that says this is our total debt. When you get your audit, but our audit is delayed, right? If you go to the audit, we have the 23 audit, it's right there, easy to see in the 23 audit.
That's right.
And soon we'll have the 24 audit at some point, but, so I think, part of the question is, what are we trying to convey in the budget book? The budget book also is, 25 pages, and the audit is 400 pages. So you can obviously convey a lot more in the audit than you can in the budget book. So I do think there's some things we can, decide to present. And so, again, I'm happy that they're bringing these forward. I mean, I would say that, we've had a dedicated plan starting, when Craig brought this up, and we as a commission have been working towards some very large capital projects, a rate model that has increased our water and wastewater rates and our solid waste fee, but that started 3 or 4 years ago, and we planned for projects in that rate model 4 years ago that we're building next year, and that's how the model works. And then we know we have a rate model that pays that off in the years to come. So we have been talking about these things for a long time, and they are built into the models, meaning the models are ones that are sustainable, that allow us to sell the bonds to do these projects. And as I kind of mentioned in my question, no question the coalition is right that we have intentionally spent large sums of debt to do these large projects over the last several years, and we're in pretty much the last year of that major surge, and then it drops off, which has been the plan the whole time. Get the major arterials done, get the some of the big projects out of the way, including the MSO campus is one of them, but also the water treatment plant, and so this has been an intentional discussion, and again, I know that some people have not, don't think we've been transparent about it enough, but, we've talked about it every budget year. I was talking to someone the other day who, even in last year's, the transmittal letter, Craig's transmittal letter was, I'm so proud of the infrastructure we have, the amount of money we've put into the infrastructure over the last couple of years. That's the first line in the transmittal letter, because we are proud of that, because we are working towards the lowest cost of ownership because of those changes. So, we are doing, as I said in my question, $83 million this year. It tapers off because we have maxed out some of those funds that we know what's sustainable. And so, anyway, I think that's been the plan. We've been implementing the plan, and we're at the top of that curve, and then it goes down, which has been the plan all along. And I do think it's a sustainable model that we have come to. I hope everyone who's concerned about a lot of these issues comes back on July 8th when the budget comes out, because when we talk about property tax, we talk about, those are all, a lot of the things talked about tonight are big parts of our general fund issues. But, certainly if you take a $6 million, general obligation expense, that $6 million is paid for like your house, paid for over 20 years. You can't just drop a $6 million project out of the CIP and move that to the general fund. That's not how it works, especially when you have some of those funds being paid out of the utility funds. Those aren't transferable. It's not 1-to-1 ratio, and maybe we do, and I hope, and I've seen the video, and I've seen some of the things that we've done to try to explain that it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, which is why you use funding. As I was talking to someone the other day about this issue, if I spend $50,000 in year one, and in year two I buy a house, for a $300,000 house, my total expenditures just went up by 300%, and my total expenditures went from $50,000 to $350,000. But my cash expenditures went from from $50,000 to whatever, $70,000, as I make my payments over those years. So if you want to talk about the expenditures, you're talking about big expenditures that are now being paid out. So yes, our expenditures have gone up, just like our debt's gone up, but that's not the same as what has been in the general fund. Although it has an impact, it certainly has an impact, and we're going to be talking about that on July 8th. So I hope everyone comes back at that time. And finally, I'm appreciative of the coalition and the survey results. I know they only have 80 so far, and this is the first time I heard them. I am interested in hearing survey results, though I will say I am a very big fan of our model. Some people say it's too complicated and it's too hard to use, but it's realistic. When the surveys say, do you want to cut fire? Do you want to cut police? And do you want to raise property taxes? I think that's an easy, a lot of people say, well, don't cut fire, don't cut police, don't raise my property taxes. But then it doesn't ask you the question, well, then what? I just forgot the name of our
Balancing Act.
Balancing Act. The reason it's complicated is because what we do is complicated. And you can't just say, this is what we'd like, and go figure it out. Balancing Act is complicated because what we do is complicated because they all interrelated. And so I know it doesn't work for everybody, so I'm not opposed to more survey results to get more information. But I'm a big fan of Balancing Act because, we talked about this once. People said, well, people just go in with their pet projects and say, I want more fire, so I'm going to go into Balancing Act and put more money into fire. Or I just want to help police, and all I care about is police. But Balancing Act makes you balance it somewhere. You have to go out and take it from someplace else, or you have to raise taxes. And even if there's 50 people who show up with the goal of making sure police get more money, they don't all take it from the same place. They don't all say we want increased property taxes. They don't all say we want to take it from Parks and Rec or take it from fire. We get information from that because it forces them to say that. If the survey just says, do you want police cut? Well, someone can go to that survey and, hey, 50 people go take that survey and just say, no, I don't want police cut. Okay, that's useful. People don't want police cut. But that is not as useful as trying to find that find that difficult answer of where to make that happen. Okay, a couple other comments on what was brought up. I guess I'm not ready to do something different on Tennessee and Kentucky. I understand what's being requested. I know 9th and Mass aren't the same, but those will be our first protected bike lanes. And I want to see how those work before we build more protected bike lanes myself. That's not going to happen until 2027, so we still have some time on that. I am interested. I know affordable housing is going to be an issue. And so I think that's something we have to continue to look at going forward in the CIP, but it's hard to know. I do think we need to leave Station 6 in. I kind of pushed to put Station 7 in last year at the end in the 2030. I understand it makes sense not to put that in now, but I certainly want to keep Station 6 in. That's going to be a major issue going forward. And the last one I was going to say is overall, I'm pretty, I think I'm pretty supportive of the CIP as it exists. I mean, as always, there are new flashy things we'd rather spend money on because they make a difference, but that is not always the best use of the money. And I think the CIP is focused on really maintaining our assets. And so I appreciate that. I might want to have, I mean, I was a supporter last year of some of the west of the K-10 development projects. And I know we've moved some of those in the off years out. And because of the ability not to sustain those, and I understand that, I might want to understand that a little bit better in those out years. And see if there's some, I mean, those are developer-driven projects, so there might be some development that comes along that helps us figure that out. And so I'm just putting a placeholder on that. I mean, obviously, we're not going to vote on this till September, so we have a little time to figure that out. But I think that's something I want to highlight. And the last one was something else. I can't remember. I'm not sure. Can't remember now. It'll come to me later. Sorry, I've talked too long. Anyway, thanks.
Good, thank you. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll probably not match Vice Mayor's.
You don't want to.
But I do appreciate your comments, though, especially on the infrastructure and the illustration of where we are in the bell curve and how long and how hard we work to get there, because a lot of that is deferred maintenance, stuff that we've needed to work on and address for a very long time, and we're finally doing it. And now that we're reaching the top of that bell curve and working our way on the way down. So, but to answer the questions in front of us, and some of them brought up at this time, I'm not interested in the. I understand where people were coming from on Tennessee, Kentucky, but I probably would agree with Vice Mayor Finkeldye that we should probably see how Mass goes first. And also, I heard tell there was going to be a study out there, so information from the study. Affordable housing to Commissioner Sellers and Vice Mayor Finkeldye, that'll probably be something that'll need to be addressed. I say probably, but given the climate of the federal and the state government, it's more than likely. So I know that's an ongoing conversation, and I'm in favor of keeping Station 6 in there as well. And to some of the other questions, I would lean more towards the second option on the capital sales tax for including both the Lawrence Loop and street maintenance. I think that seems like a more palatable option to me. The second one, there's not unfunded that I would switch to funded or delayed or prioritized. I mean, I know Vice Mayor was a little bit squishy on west of K-10. I'm not sure about that one yet. But, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but that was, it'd be an interesting conversation. But no, and I think I answered the last one about the expansion proposal there. I think we at least needs to have Station 6 in there. I know that having Station 7 is a little bit more than we can process right now, but I think that gets us to a good spot to go ahead and start.
Great, thank you.
That was shorter.
That
That was shorter than me.
was.
Commissioner Sellers, you want to
It was.
add in anything or even address those bullet points if you could?
Yes, I sure can, and I don't apologize for talking long, so let's normalize commissioners talking long and actually conversing about complex things, so it's nothing wrong with that. We're allowed to stay here until about 11 o'clock, so if we have to use all that time to get things done, then that's what we were elected to do. But anywho, I digress. So I want to start with my initial conversation around federal dollars. And not only because I want to be able, I'm not trying to control the narrative on it. I want us to see the more holistic aspect of that. And what we have in front of us is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of moving targets. And I don't say that just because we need to look at our CIP and address our CIP. I think we've had enough conversation from other commissioners in regards to that, and our staff answering that shows what we've been in play with the CIP today as far as major projects within this that we've been addressing, and that I'm glad we're addressing. I'm excited about the MSO campus. I'm excited that we're taking the danger out of our employees. We want to talk about the importance of projects and projects that are going to have sustainability. That is one that's going to sustain us. That's going to address employee satisfaction. That's going to address sustainability. It's going to address a lot of things as far as deferred and all those things as it related to the MSO. So I'm happy about that. Going back to the talk about federal dollars, I brought that up because the idea is that, not to be too existential, the whole system is flawed. The fact of the matter is that we will never be able to raise the money needed to address the things that we need to address within our city. That is between the relationship that we have with our state government and what we have with our federal dollars. That's why you get hounded every 10 years to figure out, to make sure you complete your census, and why we pay taxes. And I am not lecturing anybody, I am edifying us, because as elected officials, it is our job to edify you in the gaps that things that we do not know. And I'm not saying we don't know these things, but they are relational and they're complex and they are competing values. And that's what we have to do. So when we're looking at the federal dollars, I have to look at this as a commissioner, that there is no guarantee that we will get those. Those are federal dollars that we received to address the Lawrence Loop, to complete it, to get to a point where we've made headway in it in these last 5 years than we ever have. It's federal dollars for transportation, for street maintenance. It's dollars for EPA. It's dollars for water treatment. It's dollars for housing. So as you can see, we are intertwined into what has sadly been a flawed system, that we've moved things around and duct taped and, kicked to the side and said a little prayer and hoping that impactful policy change would happen and we would be able to do things essentially the right way. And that hasn't happened, or we've made headways and we've tried to address those gaps as we can. Our AHAB, our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, addresses that. But we do need help from the federal government and the state government. And right now, we're in this weird space where anything we say and do, we're kind of Mirandized in a negative way about what we say or could potentially do could impact the money that you all paid the government to give back to your community. And that's ugly. That is super ugly, and that's where we're at right now. So what I shared in conversation around the Ninedale project is that we have to figure out that competing and complexity of what are the things that we can try to take and bring back home to address, and what are the things that, what would that look like if there was no federal dollars. Don't know who it would go to, because apparently we're all trying to do the same thing, but the federal government doesn't want to fund us. But where does that money go? What do we end up doing? What does that look like? Does that look like sales tax increase? Does it look like addressing our CIP amount and increasing it to address things that our community says that they want, like police and fire? What does that look like? What does that responsibility look like to the community as it relates to the conversation we have? What is that sacrifice? Because this is all a form of sacrifice, but it's for the greater good. And so what I don't want us to do is decide on who is the greater good, and as far as who gets the sacrifice. I don't want the lesser person to be sacrificed for someone else's greater good. But where is the balance, and how do we see that, and how do we change our definition and how we define and articulate that? That's what's happening in our community right now. That's what should be happening. That's the second time somebody's phone went off while I was talking. Silence your phones. So those are the projects that we're trying to do. Those are the things that we're trying to forecast. And I appreciate staff bringing it to us as we continue to identify things in real time. So there's a lot of conversation that goes by that. Whatever coalitions, seen and unseen, heard and unheard, are doing, that's the work that should be done. And that we should be trying to bring information to educate everyone on this, because no, we are not the holders of information. We should be the sharers of information. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm withholding information because you don't you don't deserve to know it. You're a taxpayer, you deserve to know it. You deserve to understand it. It's our job to help you understand it. So that rant's over. Where I see things as far as the CIP and as far as funding opportunities, one of the areas as far as things that were not funded this year that I feel like should be funded in our future years, yes, AHAB should be that. Affordable housing needs to have a balance there, because that's the first thing I know, that there's some aspects to how we look at our funding and being able to have dollars within the CIP to address affordable housing gaps and opportunities that may not come up that we can use to address that. And it should be there. We know what those are. If it's land acquisition, we know from our partners what that could be. So let's be proactive in that. We've been proactive with conversation around fire and medical expansion. We finally we solidified Station 6. We know that there's additional with Station 7 and relocations. I think there's some conversation for us to be had about CIP sales tax, and that can be a bigger conversation. That could be coalition conversation about what that looks like. Is that appetite? What is the appetite? Because all of these solutions are going to have, we're going to have to address the appetite for it. And what is your appetite? I know in the survey, it had some incremental suggestions for what that could look like. I think that from a survey perspective was a little bit leading because you kept it under 1 mil. We can't get a lot done with 1 mil. We can get some things done, but nothing in that CIP is going to get done with a 1 mil increase. So as you talk about competing values and what you value and what needs are, 1 mil is something to start the conversation, but as far as impact, we need to start having conversation about true impact. I put initials in here? Okay, so some of the items that we have on the unfunded that I would like for us to strongly consider. Funding within the CIP was the AHAB, it was the affordable housing line item. Specifically, in addition to that, our farmers market. When I look at this is a balance of community benefit as well as economic drivers. We are surrounded by ag. We need to look at that. So agroeconomics is something that's always been a standard. It's been a solid in our community. We need to look at what investments look like for that. I looked at the review for the pool painting, for the indoor, knowing that how we utilize that is an economic driver in our community. So looking at that the same way, as well as the emergency shelter for women and families. And splash pad west, on the west side. Those are 3 things. Those are not part of the bigger pieces, but those are smaller, but they have a huge community impact. And those are things that we need to look at. I know I've talked about this offhanded to staff. I would like, and we've talked about what projects are impacted by grant funding for federal dollars. I want to look at the inverse of that and see and keep an eye on if there's opportunities for state and federal dollars and I don't want to put this in pie in the sky. I say World Cup, and that's not a silver bullet, but if there are funding opportunities, transportation, mostly probably transportation, that we can maybe utilize those dollars to counteract some of the unfunded items that we have. Let's explore that option, or if there's an opportunity to bring those up in conversations, because then those are one-time dollars, again, that you can utilize to say that those are enhancements for World Cup. The watershed, I know that the projects, I know we're working on the middle. I thought we were under negotiations for the other piece, so that is to be continued. So I think there's just conversation for us to continue having on that. And I think that covers mostly everything I have for now. Yeah. I just think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, a few items. I want to start with street maintenance. The the fact that we're at 63.1 on our PCI and our goal is 70. My concern is that we're actually going backwards from what we had discussed years ago when we first started looking at street maintenance and trying to catch up with what we have, because our goal is always to find the lowest cost of ownership, and the way to do that is to make sure we maintain our infrastructure. And it doesn't seem like we're doing that, so I'm very concerned about that if there's some way we can figure out how we can at least fund to the point where we're not going backwards. But it sounds like in the next few years, if we don't do something differently, we're going to be down to 60 in our PCI, which it costs more in the long run, obviously. The Fire Station 6, I'm glad that we could finally get this in here and show that we are going to move forward with that. I think it's important to do that. The Tennessee-Kentucky project, I appreciate the idea of looking at doing that. I don't disagree with, seeing what Mass Street does first, but as we look towards redoing Tennessee and Kentucky streets, that we, put the prospect in there of one of the design options would be potentially to look at the buffered lanes as part of that project, and I would think that would be good. I do appreciate the coalition's work coming forward, especially their discussion about the debt. It helped me to understand tonight better, where we're at with how much debt we can take on, and I think that's really important to keep our thumb on that number to make sure that we're, this is all sustainable. Appreciate that. The other item that has continued to give me pause is the MSO campus. When this was first discussed numerous years ago and we started to kind of get the plans together, the cost that we were presented with at that time was about $28 million to do it. And within the next 2 years after that, or maybe 2 to 3 years, all of a sudden it ballooned over $100 million. And that has always given me pause, and I wonder if we should possibly reevaluate that to see if there's something that we can't scale back on or, make a different decision on, because I just think that number is very concerning. So that's what I've got.
Very good. Would you be interested in using any capital sales tax? We talked about on-loop funding at all, or no?
Yeah, I think the capital sales tax for sure, yes.
So make sure I got that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. I think that was a lot of information for everybody. I'm not quite sure how to move forward with kind of putting them all into a list, but I think staff has been paying attention, and I think we all have some more time on our hands to talk more in detail. I'm not going to elaborate any further. I think everyone's pretty much touched on all the points that have been brought up, and then also some ideas on how we could move things around. I like the idea of trying to maybe localize some of our public housing dollars if we can. I think that's an important step forward in removing ourselves from federal and state grants if they're not going to be available. I think it's important to keep that movement going forward in whatever means possible. I think would mean how do we pay for that in the absence of federal and state dollars, and we need to address that probably. I don't really want to swap anything around too much. I do agree that I think the farmers market's something that we've had laying out there for a long time. I think maybe we can come up with a creative way to address that problem in a larger project perhaps down the road without trying to just earmark one thing or one set of dollars for that item, maybe create something larger. But I don't know where I would get the money to. I don't see things being swapped out readily. I tried to move things around, and it really wasn't very easy for us to do things in that fashion. So I would ask staff to see what it would take to maybe, if there's any way to come up with an idea on the farmer's market, or at least some planning. I think whatever dollars we could put towards creating some sort of agribusiness center here in town. I think that's a great idea and a way to leverage our agricultural roots and location. And then I think, generally speaking, if we can focus on keeping the focus on the future, but if we need to move dollars around, I'm okay with transitioning things a year or two one direction or the other. But overall, I think I agree with pretty much everything that's been laid out here to the best of their ability. I went through a bunch of items to try to change, to try to move things around, and I didn't really come up with a solution, so I'm going to rely on staff to do that lifting. And And then I agree, the street maintenance is something that, the PCI index is something we've had longer than many cities, and I think we've done a good job of trying to focus on that. But as we've focused on these larger arterials, I think our dollars have been spent in other ways, and I think we need to continue to maintain what we have, and whatever funds would not be fungible, I want to keep that money in that account as much as possible, our street maintenance funds. So I wouldn't be wanting to move anything from there. But that's about it as far as I'm concerned. I think I've got all those items touched on.
I got one more thing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I meant to mention the farmers market, because that's something that if there's some way we can figure out how to get that, going sooner, I think that would be important. I would support that.
Yeah, okay. I was just looking for info any way we could, what it might take as far as dollars, as far as just studying it and getting
it was hard to
planned.
I would lean towards funding it in the CIP as it is now is a little bit more difficult, but if there's an alternative way that we can
Right,
find to go
another
ahead.
way to
Yeah.
manifest it through another project.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Keep it on the
Yes,
CIP,
yes,
figure out how to
yes.
do that.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I will say, it's, even under the proposal, I think, under the farmer's market proposal was for 27 and 28. And I guess I'd be much more interested in, understanding the full impact of that and where the funding sources are. I think something like the farmer's market is, possible fundraising, possible grant opportunities, and, well, I can't quite tell. The proposal, I think, is for $5 million in 2028 with some planning money in 2027. Is the $5 million the full building? Is that everything and we're paying for all of it? Or is it $10 million that they're asking for $5 million of?
Great.
Or if it's a $5 million that if we have $1 million to help fund it and they raise $4 million, there's a lot of unanswered questions for me on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Commissioner, I think you bring it up for that piece, and I know we get the narratives after everything we see, what
Yeah.
the scoring and everything is, and maybe that is a function of process for some of these project requests that we get that are either resident requests or organizational requests. Do we need to look at addressing those as when we talk about public-private partnership? Are we talking about match language, percentage match? Is that, do we need to, we don't have to come up with the answer tonight, but I think that is something that we need to think about as we're starting to get more interesting residential requests for different projects. Is this something that's available that we want to say, hey, you need to come up with a 2% match, or at least a 2%, part of this project, or 5% project, part if it's going to be CIP funded? I don't know. I think that's a conversation that we need to start having as we start to see several of these residential requests come in. We had one on here for roughly $25 million for a subdivision. What does that look like? How do we break that down? I think those are all questions that one or two commissioners may have on here that may change, how they see or how they perceive a project on here, to the point that you made.
Okay. So any other things we want to point out before we move on from this item? I think we've provided the input. I'm not sure exactly who needs it. Rochelle, did you get what you needed? Allie, did you get what you needed? The answers? Not?
Clear as mud for the next month.
Or vague? Okay, very good.